So thanks for joining us. And I am now honored to welcome Nicole Perry, who will be presenting the psychological safety scaffold.
Thanks, Missy. Hello, everyone. It's so great to be with you. This is my third year at Arts Plus Change, so I love coming back to this conference and just being with other artists who are also excited about using the arts to change the world because we could use them. We could use them. Gonna share here. I am Nicole Perry. I am located in South Florida, the unceded lands of the Seminole and Miccosukee peoples. Today, particularly, I am in Theater Lab, which is a theater company in Boca Raton that specializes in new plays. And I am intimacy and movement directing their next play that opens a week from today called Two of Us on the Run. And I'm telling you about this new play because look for it. It is going places. It is an incredible, incredible play about the life of teenage girls in America. It is really powerful, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So I'm hanging out with these folks today. So if you hear some like weird sound cues or other things coming through my headphones, I'm hoping we're okay, but just to give you some background on some oddities that may occur. This is a bio about me. I'm not going to read it because you can go to my website, which is just my name, nicoleperry.org, and you can read all of that. But I just wanted to give you some background on where my work is coming from as a movement professional and dance educator, and also an intimacy professional, which has really brought a focus to my work in both creation and education on consent and trauma-informed practices. And some of you may have taken a class with me at this conference where we've talked about consent. And when I learned about psychological safety, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the missing piece for me. This is how we go from this typical power over structure of teacher student or choreographer dancers or director actors to that collaborative structure that we say so often that we want in the arts and in arts education, but doesn't always seem possible because of the institutions that we're in, the traditions that we're a part of. When I read Timothy Clark's book, The Four Stages of Psychological Safety, I was like, here is how we do this. This is like a scaffold, a step-by-step guide to building to power with, to building to collaboration. So today we're taking a look at psychological safety. As I go through the slides and I say the things that I'm excited to share with you, please, please, please feel free to do what you want to do. Be on your camera, be off your camera, put questions in the chat, put comments in the chat. I learn best in conversation, and therefore I also teach best in conversation. So feel free to raise a hand, pop in a comment. I'm excited for it. So here we go. Psychological safety is a term actually coined by Amy Edmondson, who's a researcher at Harvard. And she defines this in her book, The Fearless Organization. And this is a new term. The Fearless Organization was written in 2018, 2019, getting my dates slightly confused here, but it's pretty recent. And she, for the first time, uses the term psychological safety and defines it as a climate in which people are comfortable expressing and being themselves. Oh my gosh, that's exactly what we want in the arts and in arts training and arts education, a climate in which people are comfortable expressing and being themselves. Well, I just said to Missy a little bit ago, I moved my slides all around. And yes, I did, because this slide does not go here. Let me take a quick look at this thing, because that one goes there. Neat. So neat. Psychological safety for me has a lot in common with trauma-informed teaching or trauma-informed creative practices, to borrow a term from Molly W. Shank. And the Center for Substance Abuse and Mental Health defined trauma-informed care with these 6 definitions, and I think they really work for trauma-informed teaching or trauma-informed creative practices. And as I go through these, I think you'll see how they can lend towards a sense of psychological safety or a place where people feel like they can be themselves. Step 1 is just safety. We cannot learn in a trauma response. We simply cannot. If we are in a trauma response, all of our mental energy is going towards survival. We can push through. We could keep going with this scene work that is activating us, but that doesn't mean we'll remember the work the next day. It's not sustainable. It's not a good use of our time. Also doesn't mean we're doing our best work. We don't have the energy for creativity when we're in survival. Trustworthiness and transparency. We have to be able to talk to each other. We have to have some expectations and know that those expectations will be met. We have to understand how power dynamics in our space function so that we can also work with our peers, that we have peer support, this collaborative model, that we're not in competition with each other, which is incredibly hard in the arts, as particularly in arts training programs, where not only are you getting grades, but you're expected to work with people in class who you're up against in auditions for roles and pieces. But competition creates fear. Competition creates scarcity. Competition creates distrust. And if we just said trustworthiness and safety are required to be trauma-informed or to have a sense of psychological safety, competition is not conducive to that. So building spaces where we build more support instead of competition can lead to that. Collaboration and mutuality. We have to know we're in this together, that we're working together towards the same goals. And then these last 2 are particularly important when it comes to teaching and psychological safety. Empowerment, voice, and choice. I happen to hate the word empowerment. It's a nasty buzzword because when we say, particularly as teachers, that we want to empower our students, we are negating the fact that they are powerful beings already. If I say I'm going to empower you, I'm actually taking away your power and trying to give you something. You already have power. We just have different roles of power as teacher and student. I do not need to empower you. I need to give you an opportunity to step fully into your power, your voice, your choice, your creative experiences. And this is part of trauma-informed teaching or creative practices because folks who have experienced a trauma have had choice taken away from them. Nobody chooses trauma. It's not the choice people go for. Choice was taken away from them in that moment of trauma. So every chance that someone who has experienced trauma has to actually make a choice and have that choice upheld is an opportunity for healing, is an opportunity to demonstrate care. And then cultural, historical, and gender issues. We cannot divorce these from our body. Our bodies carry our cultural, historical, and gender issues into every space we occupy. Because our bodies are in these spaces of training and creating and performing, we cannot ignore cultural, historical, and gender issues. As educators and creators, we have to be able to competently and responsibly talk about these things and navigate these consequences that enact themselves on the bodies in our spaces every single day, and frankly are changing rapidly in America every single day. Joy also likes this empowerment. Good, good. I want to get rid of that word. This quote comes from Alex Chevron-Bennett's book, The Equity-Centered Trauma-Informed Education. It's not teaching. That's a big lie on that quote. Equity-Centered Trauma-Informed Education is the name of her book. And Alex actually has a second book out as well in this series for educators on being trauma-informed. But she defines trauma-informed as our thought process being informed by trauma. That's it. That's all it means, is that we recognize as educators that folks are going to be in our spaces who've experienced trauma. And we likely don't know what that trauma is. That's not our place to ask or diagnose, but they're in our spaces carrying these things. So it is our responsibility as educators and creators to be able to navigate these things in trauma-informed ways. For me, trauma-informed teaching and creating is not a Venn diagram with consent forward. It is a circle. It is the same thing, right? Empowering, nope, look, I just used that word because it's in my brain. Not what I wanted. Offering opportunities for consent and being trauma-informed requires that we mitigate power dynamics, that we are transparent about what they are, that we offer as many opportunities for collaboration or for people to function in their power as possible. It requires dialogue. If I'm going to enter into dialogue with you, I have to assume that your point of view is equal and valid to mine for you. Maybe not for me, but for you. I have to consider your opinions as valid for you. That's dialogue. If I want to hear you out, if I want to understand you. Otherwise, I'm just waiting for my turn to talk, which is what a lot of people think is dialogue, but it's not actually engaging in conversation. And they both require choice. Recognizing that there's more than one way to get things done, recognizing that there are opportunities for difference, there's opportunities for creativity, there are many possibilities, and that there isn't just one right way. So this is the structure I was already bringing with me when I read Amy Edmondson's Fearless Organization and when I read Timothy R. Clark's 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. And Edmondson's book was really great, but also really look at business in terms of like case studies. She'd be like, look at this organization and the cool things they're doing, which was very cool. But Clark really went through and said, here's what this looks like in practice. And that was what was super interesting to me and what I hope to bring to you today. That if you're already hearing these things about consent and trauma informed, if you're already trying to bring these things into your classroom, I think the psychological safety scaffold is a way to really practically put these things in place in your classroom, in your rehearsal room, in your studio. So these are the 4 stages of psychological safety as written by Timothy Clark in his book. Included or inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety. You can see these kind of go up the scale. And I do think these are steps. I think there are some times where we could, skip ahead to one without going really deeply into another, but for the most part, this is a pretty linear progression, and I've drawn it that way. So included safety or inclusion safety, I also often call this belonging safety because I live in Florida, where inclusion is a word we're not allowed to say in public schools. Where I am right now. Make sure there are no police. So I often call this belonging safety. And this simply means people know they belong. They know they belong in your space, period. They look around the space and they go, oh, maybe there are people who look like me, their age, their race, their gender, their size. There are people that look like me. The way that I am being addressed as a human in this space lets me know I belong. The way in which material is presented in a way that is accessible to me. Maybe it's visual and oral. Maybe there's a ramp as well as steps that things are accessible to us. So we know we belong in this space. And inclusion safety, even though it's our first step, it's also our foundation. And when I was doing my Pilates training, Romana Krasnowski always would say, the basics are the basics, not because they're easy, but because they're the foundation on which everything else is built. And it's the same thing here. Inclusion safety is the first step, not because it's the easiest step, but because it's the foundation on which everything else is built. It's actually very challenging to be fully inclusive, especially in certain climates and areas. It requires a rigor of teachers and creators to be fully inclusive. Some things that I do to let students know that they belong in my space is something that happened at the top of this presentation by both Missy and I, a land acknowledgement. Just saying, here's where we are, here's something we have in common about being on this land, and there's a bigger picture that holds us all together. A positionality statement I didn't offer today, but sound cues, fun. Which I didn't offer today, but my bio is there as a little bit of background, being transparent about who I am and what I'm bringing to this space. Things like introduction letters from students, where they get to tell you more about who they are as people, and you get to be interested in them as people, or they get to discuss maybe their goals or their needs for the class. Accessibility needs, there are some of those as educators that we must meet. We get letters from the student services office, right? That's like, this student needs this from you. But we can also often go much beyond that by providing visuals with our lectures or giving opportunities to make recordings of things so people can access them later. All of those things can be inclusion practices. And you might be thinking of some already that you're like, oh, I do this in my class. Maybe I never gave it that particular name of, I want people to know they belong, but that's definitely what this thing is for. When we know we belong, then we can feel safe enough to take risks, which is learning. Learning is inherently risky because when we are learning, we have to admit there's stuff we don't know. I don't know can be a very scary thing to say. I think it's one of the scariest things as an educator to say is I don't know. But having students be able to say, I don't know. Having actors or dancers being able to say, I don't know. That's risky. And when I'm learning, I might get it wrong. I might fail. I might make a mistake. I might make a public mistake. Say something stupid in class and be laughed at. And I have to know as a learner that even if I fail, even if I make a mistake, I still am going to belong. That layer of psychological safety, that foundation of belonging isn't going away because I've made a mistake. As educators and creators, providing this learner safety looks a lot like, how do we talk about mistakes? Do we reinforce that mistakes are opportunities for learning? Do we reinforce that there are multiple ways to get to the outcome? Or that everyone's final product might not look the same, and that's okay? Or that we all might have different goals for being in this class. And you achieving your goal is just as important as you achieving your goal when they're totally different goals. Can we risk and learn and fail and still belong? And for me, this is in both learning and assessing as a teacher, because that's one of actually the most psychologically unsafe, trauma, uninformed things we do as educators is assessment. Because assessment very often occurs in one size fits all ways. We give you a multiple choice test, or we give you all the same essay question, or we give you all the same combination to execute. And we measure them against the same rubric or the same scale. If we recognize that all students learn differently, which I think as educators, many of us do, all students learn differently, why wouldn't all students be assessed differently? I know why. It's because it's really hard. It takes a lot of time, and grading is a pain in the ass. But it is not a psychologically safe habit to have of assessment because it doesn't reinforce learner safety. It says you have to be right. You have to get it right. So how do we address assessment in our classes? Is assessment still a growing space and learning space? If we know we belong, if we know that it's safe to fail, then I might feel safe to actually open my mouth and contribute something, to make choices, to share my ideas, to be creative with my true expressivity, not just the thing that I think the teacher wants to see or know or hear from me, not just the choice that I think the director is going to go, yeah, that's it, or the choreographer is going to go, yeah, that's it. The choice that is most true to me. But only if I know it's safe to make a mistake, that even if the director goes, well, that was a choice. Could we try it a different way? That we know that, okay, that was it. It's not a problem. I'm not a bad person. I have not been kicked out of the room because I made that choice. They're just looking for something different here. Is there only one right way of doing things in our classroom or our rehearsal room? I've been in a rehearsal room recently that has a lot of typical hierarchical control. And as a person that doesn't do that, I found it very, very challenging because there is only one right way. And many of the performers are constantly spending their energy trying to figure out how to do the one right way when they don't know what it is, as opposed to spending their energy making choices and embodying their performance. Work is happening in that room. It's not maybe its most psychological safety way, or its most creative, fulfilling, embodied, personally passionate way. And then our last level is challenger safety. If I know that it's not only safe for me to contribute my ideas that are mine, maybe if it's safe for me to say, well, I think this, then maybe it's safe for me to say, I think this about this. This thing isn't working. This usual way of doing things isn't working for me, isn't meeting my needs. Why? Why do we do it like that? Why is this the way it's always been done? And we can push back against that structure. Or challenger safety is also creating a whole new structure. And often we want students to get to there and dance and theater classes where they're creating a whole new piece or writing a monologue or a play or devising something. We want students to end up in challenger safety. But yet very often we haven't given them these other layers to know that it's safe to build something new. Because maybe their single ideas that they've contributed to structures that already exist in contributor safety haven't been met with grace or with validation. Maybe their mistakes and their failures haven't been met as learning opportunities, but have been instances for shame. The difference between contributor and challenger safety can sometimes be a little smushy. Contributor safety is like the structure already exists. If I say, here's the combination, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you finish 7, 8. You're contributing to that structure. If I say you have 8 counts to improv, that you're creating that whole structure. That's the challenger safety side. So that's how I think about those differences of like, who's creating the structure? Are we accepting the structure as it is, or are we building something brand new? And there's also this sometimes that I hear in doing this presentation from folks that'll be like, Nicole, But I have this one student who on day one was like challenging immediately. We have all had those students that on day one is already in challenger mode. And I would suggest that this person is not experiencing challenger safety, that they've actually like jumped way up there because they aren't experiencing any of these levels of safety. Likely the very first one. There is something in this person's past experience that tells them that they don't belong there. And so they're challenging from the very first moment to either prove to themselves or you that they don't belong there because that's been their past experience. They've been told they don't belong in school, they're not a good student, they're not a dancer, they're not a ballerina, they don't have the right body, they're not rhythmic, whatever. They've been told something that is sticking with them. And they're in that challenger mode, not because they feel safe to challenge, but because they don't feel safe that they're even included.
Yeah.
So with these 4 levels of psychological safety, I get a sip of water. It takes time, which is a bummer because we never have enough of it in a class or a rehearsal process. There's never enough time. And so I will say, as you're looking at these and thinking about what are some practices that I can do in these steps to give yourself time. It is my goal as a teacher to be at challenger safety by the end of the semester, that folks are creating something new or taking some old structure and flipping it on its head to be a new thing. But if you only have one workshop, you might not ever get to challenger safety, and that's okay. If you have a particularly difficult class for whatever reason, you have a hurricane day, and then you have snow days, and then you have all of these things that just interrupt your schedule, or life happens. We don't always get to these things because it does take time. Just spending your whole time in inclusion and learner safety in a classroom could be fine. It could be fine. It's up to you as an educator to decide what your values are as an educator. Where do you want to end up? And where and how can you spend your time in building these things? Yeah, I said inclusion safety starts on day one and then is ongoing. And so I try to get into inclusion and learner safety from the first moment, whether I'm in a rehearsal process or a classroom. That you know that you belong and that you know that you can make mistakes. I try to, as an educator, give a lot of opportunities for contribution. That example I gave of here's 6 of the 8 count, I'll start with that the first week of dance class. But they get used to bringing their own ideas into space. And I do start in that way too, where it's like, I'm giving you lots and asking you for a little bit. And then as the semester goes on, that starts to inverge. So we build our way up to that challenger safety, up to that space of you're building the structure now, instead of what so often happens in a dance class will be like an improv, and particularly in ballet. And you're like, okay, make up 8 counts. And the little bunheads are like, no one has ever asked them to improv before, and they freeze, they look like deer in headlights, right? Or the first time you ask an actor to make a choice when they've come out of a super hierarchical training program that has told them that the text has all the answers for them, or that the director only has one way of doing things and they have to just figure out that way. Asking an actor to make a choice, any choice, sometimes can be too much. That's too much. We have to build in these small steps of contribution for them to feel safe. So I would love for us to have a little brainstorm here of practices that you have maybe already in your classroom that you think fit one of these categories, or a practice that you're like, I always do this. Do you think this fits in one of these categories? Let's figure it out. Or like I always do this, but I don't think it's quite one of these things. How could I make it one of these things? I'd love for us to spend some time developing some practices for class or rehearsal that you feel like I can go out of here and start building some safety when I enter rooms. Co-constructing community agreements. Yes, that is a great one for inclusion safety. That is a great one. Offering opportunities for agency. Missy, can you give us some examples of what that looks like in your classroom?
Sure. Um, yeah, so first of all, talking about how participation can look very different. And so even if you are witnessing, like that witnessing is a beautiful way to participate. And so like allowing people to feel still included, even if they're not so interested in doing everything that we're doing physically, et cetera. And then even in the activities that you're doing, passing around the leadership, inviting people to contribute movement ideas, choosing whether or not to do this seated or standing, choosing whether or not to, I don't know. I mean, like, there's just so many ways, right? Maybe that's enough.
Yeah, these are great. These are great. I call them like zones of participation. Sometimes it's like you can choose your zone of participation. You're still participating if you're observing, because you're gonna have some kind of task. You're witnessing the movement to see how many level changes they have, or if the movement travels from core to distal or distal to core. You're witnessing to see what resonates in your own body. Like you have some task when you're in that observation or witness role. It's not that you've checked out, right? And those how we participate, how we stay engaged in the work is a great way of making a choice and being included. Theater people. And I don't know, can you all write on the whiteboard? I don't know. I don't know how the game works in here. Just me. You can like bounce around, but I can only write. I don't know. I don't know how how it works.
Do you want us to speak out loud or write in the chat?
Either way, whatever is working for you is fine.
Well, I'll tell you what I did on Wednesday morning with this volunteer group of older women that I was teaching dance to. It was their first dance class. And the famous name game, of course, in dance. But I added of course they were adults and not kids, so the feeling of inclusion, everything goes a little bit faster because they are who they are. They come to accept basic things like that with ease. But I said, besides telling us your name, please tell us something you'd like us either to know about you or something that most people would not know about you unless you shared it, like something that is very special that you would like us to hear. And it helped us get to know each other. And then it was just brilliant. I mean, I couldn't believe this was their first time because everything out. And one person said that she was a little self-conscious. So I wanted her to feel included. And she had said, I am no good at dancing and I will never remember anything. And little did she know that I wasn't going to be teaching any steps. So that shouldn't have to. But anyway, after the name game, you know how you accumulate all those movements and you have a phrase? Well, we did it slowly, we did it quickly, we did it all sorts of different ways. And then 40 minutes later, I said, let's insert the movement phrase that you have earlier into what you're doing now and she remembered it, and she was so excited. So there was a feeling of belonging, clearly.
Sorry, left my microphone off. Yes, that is awesome. And just asking for that like personal fact, accepting students as whole persons, right? That like they're not only a student in a dance class or a theater class, they're a whole human that has something else going on in their life. And Joy also brought up a great point like about age and formation and the speed of things. We were talking about like these things take time. Sometimes it doesn't, depending on your population, right? Sometimes you can move through that more quickly, and sometimes it takes more time. Cool. What was I going to put here? I was going to put like listen to everybody's stories, and then I get all lost in what's happening. Oh yes, inclusion, safety, personal sharing. And that personal sharing can also happen with little kids. They, especially those little kids that come in and they want to talk all the time, just giving that form to the class of like, okay, everybody gets to go around and say one thing that they need to share with the class today so we can do the rest of our class, which also lets them know like this is a place where you can be yourself. You can be a whole human. It's not, you're not bad for being excited, because that's always what it is with little ones, right? They're excited about their new puppy or their grandma's coming or they had a snow day. They're just excited about something in life and they want to share it, right? Creating that sharing space can be a really valid way to be included. And Rose had in the chat acknowledging our own biases and having some space for different perspectives. Cool. Cool. Anything else that is coming up for you that are like things that you do, things that you are curious about that might fit into these categories? I am noticing that we don't have anything in the challenger category, so I'm curious if we have some ideas for the challenger category. If we're like, good Lord, that sounds terrible. Why would anyone do that in their class or rehearsal room? Rose.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was talking about a little bit. Like, if we get to a point where a student is challenging, like I'm often will be in a circle talking about something, like me just reiterating what they said or honoring what they said and not trying to challenge back, right? Not being like that's wrong, but just kind of letting them challenge. And that is sometimes, I mean, sometimes it's hard, right? And so like I have to like kind of keep my own nervous system from reacting and being like, but. And so like just noticing how I respond to a challenge feels really important.
That is fantastic. Yes. So just and letting challenges be, just letting it be and be like, yep, that seems real. And now we have to think about that and deal with that and sit with that. That's great. Joy.
I have one that combines the last two steps that I used to use a lot in the high school, if you want that.
Definitely.
Because during improvisational moments, episodes, there'd be such incredible movement, and none of us, even the person improvising the movement, could remember it. And we were finding things for choreography. I would have some people watch the improvisation and then afterwards show. So here is total the fourth one, whatever that was called. I wrote it down. Challenge one, and then the people watching would say to the person who did the improv, "This is what I remember that you did that stuck in my mind, and this is how I, as best they could do the movement for them." And then they would start to collaborate, and so it was contributing, and it was and made it, and it was all up to the kids, and it was great because they owned it and they knew how to do it better than I could do it because they found it in their bodies.
That is beautiful, beautiful. Like there's some learner safety in there of just like seeing each other's choices and being like, yeah, that was the thing that you did. And I saw you. That's and some inclusion safety. So we're stacking them all up, right? Like I saw you make a choice that was cool. And now we're gonna make this thing together.
And I tried not to say something you like. I said it, I think, just now, but I didn't mean to, because with the kids, when I was in the midst of all this, I would say something that you remember that left some kind of an impression on you. Because I don't like them to say, I like it, I like it, I like it. You know?
Yes, those are phrases that are not accepted in my composition or choreography classroom. You're not allowed to say I like it or I didn't like it or it was good.
You're right.
It tells us nothing. It tells us nothing at all about anything. It's not helpful information. Those are great examples. I am going to add one to my challengers over here that I didn't bring up. I was talking about it, but it's something that I did last year for the first time and it ended up really cool. Students in my dance appreciation, dance history course have like a selection of finals. Like you can do this, that, or the other for finals. And I, for the first time, said, you can pitch me a final. They had a due date for their pitch of what they wanted to do for their final and like a rubric of how it had to match up kind of with the other things that had been proposed. And I ended up with some of the coolest finals ever. Like people who in this dance history course ended up creating like an 8-minute piece that had choreography of all the different styles that we put together. People who went back to like a dance solo that they had from their competition and they were like, if I did this now and I did it in this style that we learned about, now it would look like this. Like I got some of the very coolest finals that showed their application of the material in a way that I never would have thought of as an educator because I'm not them. And I don't know how the material is truly resonating with them. So pitch a final was actually a very cool thing to do. And like, you gotta put some limitations on it to make sure that everybody feels like it's fair. But it was a very cool process that really let some folks show what they know in an exciting way. Anything else that's percolating for us in terms of practices? Like we talked about some in the session, we've got a little list here of ways we can do, ways we can hope, ways we can try to build inclusion safety, learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety.
I have something I'm thinking about. I mean, a lot of the things I do, and I think this is probably true for a lot of us, like a lot of times it's intuitive. And so I haven't really thought about like, is this what I'm doing? But as I think about it, at the end of my classes, I do highs and lows. It comes right out of IMS, really. And so it's just a lot. And I think what that's doing is allowing them to realize that like we are all in different places and that we are all learning at different places and different we are right where we need to be. And also that's not the same for everyone. And so I'm interested in that.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like that's reinforcing learner safety for them and helping dispel some of that competition mindset stuff that starts to sink in where we're like, oh, are they better than me? Are they ahead of me? When we recognize that we all learn differently and that's accepted in this space. Yeah, and I ask students in technique classes and in theory classes to always be setting goals. And in their first introduction letter, they pick goals and then they assess themselves on their goals. And if we're all working towards different goals, of course, we're going to look different in class. Of course, we're going to be focused on different things. And if this person is actually very, very concerned about their alignment and they're always working on that, they're going to be assessing their own selves differently than the person who's worried about fluidity and flow of movement. But if they're comparing themselves to each other, they're like, oh, that person's doing that and that's not working, right? There's just this idea of being able to reinforce for them that learning looks different, which is always a good reminder for us as educators that learning looks different. I got very big. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to go that way.
Can somebody elaborate on under your inclusion? You said acknowledging bias. Can you give me an example of what that might look like?
Rose put it in the chat. I will say for me, I will say things in class of like when I'm teaching Buto in dance history, right? That of like, I think this is a super interesting dance form. I don't think it's pretty.
Okay, I see.
I'm like, would I choose to go to a 2-hour evening event of Buto? Maybe not. Maybe I would. Maybe I would because I need that personal development, right? But also challenging, then I bring it to the students often to challenge the like, is this dance, right? Because that's what they always give me in Buto is, that's not dance. and then we go to there. But because I've acknowledged from the top, like there are some things that I think are not my favorite. But we're going to talk about them anyway because they're still important just because it's not my favorite. That's something in particular for me. Rose, do you want to share more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is exactly it. And also just noticing um, when something's an opinion, because no matter what, if I'm teaching a dance and I think it's a great piece, I can talk to the composition of it, but I might like it and you might not. And like, that's a bias or that's a preference, right? And then I also think like claiming our backgrounds. So like when I'm teaching dance and social justice this semester, so I chose a bunch of pieces to talk about and pretty diverse, but it wasn't as diverse as it could have been, right? And so I automatically claiming like, hey, my lineage is in dance theater, it's in contemporary dance. I tried to find other things, but this isn't everything, right? And just saying that we each have our own perspectives and knowledge base in some ways.
Thank you.
There's an exercise that I do in my composition class, in my dance composition class and my dance history class pretty early on, where I use these like rendered blobby people. I wish I had pulled the image for you, but like they're cartoon people that like they don't have a face. They're just like a circle head on top of an oval body with like long oval arms, you know, like they're blobs. They're blobby people. And they're in these different postures. And one of them has like the two blobby people facing each other, and one has their arms out like this, and the other one has a hand extended like this. And I ask students what's going on in this picture. And they'll say things like, oh, that one on the right is like yelling at the other one. And he's like, no, but it's like this. Or they'll be like, this one's so excited about whatever. And this one's like, settle down. You know, and they'll come up with these elaborate stories off of these literal blobs that have no facial expression and an image that has no context. And I talk about that as like the stuff that we bring with us when we're viewing art in particular, that's informing us all the time, even if we don't know it. And sometimes it gets really interesting because they'll assign a gender or an age based on these blobs that have like no gender or age at all. And I'll be like, why do you think that one is a man? Why do you think that one is a child? And they really reveal some of the things that they're just carrying with them, and knowing that like whenever we give feedback on art, it tells us more about us than it tells us about the art. And that's no, I shouldn't say whenever we give feedback about art, because we can learn to give feedback that is really useful to the artist in making art. often untrained, unpracticed folks and giving feedback, give feedback that tell us more about the observer than about the art itself. And so I think that those are really, I'll see if I can find the image for you while we're wrapping up here. But I think practices like that can also be really interesting to uncover some of the things that we have as biases that we might not even know as biases, because biases in our world are so often like negative, instead of just saying, no, a bias is actually the same thing as a preference. We can have a preference, we can have a bias for or against, we can have a preference for or against, but we have to identify them. We have to know what they are. See if I can find these.
Very good distinction. That helped. Bias and preference, because it's like the word omen. When people have, I always think of an omen as bad, but there can be a good omen too, right? From what I've recently learned. So yeah, it's the association with the word that made me wonder what are you going to share? But preference, that's of course good. That helps.
I really do need to find these blobby people pictures because I'm writing a book. It's coming from Rutledge in 2026. So I'm writing a book and I need to put them in it here. I have it. We'll show it to you just so you know what I'm talking about. Yes, I will close the whiteboard and we will look at this people. This is my blobby people picture. So there's that one where the whole stories about whether or not they're helping, pushing, if it's kids, if it's old people, like whole stories that are fascinating. See what we got here. So we have reached kind of the end of my stop sharing. You don't need to see all those lovely humans. I mean, they're lovely. You can see their faces. That's not what we're here for. See if there's anything else in my slides that we need today. Oh, yes, I do have 2 more slides. Perfect. Just in time. Just in time. Here we go. In my book, coming from Rutledge in 2026, I write about what I think a psychologically safe classroom or rehearsal room looks like. And to me, a psychologically safe dance classroom or movement classroom is a place where students feel safe to ask questions, to fail, to share their needs, opinions, and ideas, to work together, and to challenge the status quo. A psychologically safe classroom values, or rehearsal process values, growth and change over being right, supporting each other over competition, and creativity and curiosity over outcomes. And this last one gets very challenging. Crystal Davis and I had a conversation about it because I gave this presentation to her dance pedagogy class at University of Maryland about like, oh, what are we going to do on those days where there's got to be outcomes? The show opens on this date, or we have a performance or a jury or whatever. That can still be the outcome, and we can still have a process that puts the value on creativity and curiosity and working towards those outcomes. Doesn't mean the outcomes go away or that we're not still working towards those, but we can still value creativity and curiosity as we go. Little review. Psychological safety is built. It is not found. It does not magically happen because we're nice. It is something that we build. I do think it builds off of consent and trauma-informed practices. And careful pedagogy is the term that I have coined for all of that, which is also the name of my book. This is turned into an advertisement at this point. There we are. And we have like 2 minutes for any other questions, comments, percolations, needs. I see Missy has the schedule for the rest of the day.
The last thing on your last slide said something about a podcast. Could you tell us about that?
There are podcasts that are linked on my website where I talk about consent in dance education. There's actually one that just came out in October. It's called the Casual Dance Teachers Podcast. And she had me on in October talking about consent. And then she also had Chelsea Weidman on talking about like personal expressivity. And there was a lot of crossover between our two things that are really, it was like 3 weeks in a row of really, really good. I'm sure all the podcasts are really great, but I only listened when it was Chelsea and me. But there's some podcasts there. And then I've done a couple for Apala, the socks. They have their own podcast called Beyond the Steps. And I've done a couple for them where we talk about boundaries and consent. So those are linked on my website on the dance page where you can find more of that. And then Sarah Lozoff, who is a wonderful intimacy director specifically for dance. She works for Rudder Dance Company, Chris Rudder, and American Ballet Theater as an intimacy director. She and I did a podcast together with the Ballet Help Desk, specifically talking about partnering and how to talk about touch and boundaries and partnering when that's always especially weird because they're like middle school and everything's weird when you're in middle school.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming. I hope you have some practices in your pocket to go try out or to be like, this is a thing that I'm doing for this purpose and feel really confident and excited about it.
Tell us your website so I can write it.
Yes, it is easy because it is my name. It is NicolePerry.org.
Okay, thank you.
And then my email is Nicole@NicolePerry.org.
Okay, good to see you again.
Always joy.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I think Kat put in the chat the rest of the happenings for today, and then we still have a full day tomorrow too. So hopefully you'll come back. And thanks so much, Nicole. It's awesome to have you again.